It's getting spooky here. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now for today's video, I'm doing a little wrap up of all the paranormal, thriller, cozy autumn reads that I have read so far in October. Some books are better than others, but I still enjoyed most of them a lot. Now this year, I haven't been branching too far out into other genres other than romance. I felt like that last year. I read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of fiction novels, and I read a lot of different genres, but for some reason this year I've been focusing a lot on historical romance and obviously sticking with my roots, which is just contemporary romance novels. But this month I made an excuse for myself that because it is the spooky season, I can free myself from romance and I can branch back out into the genres that I fell in love with last year, which include thriller novels. So here's just a couple of reads that I really enjoyed and that I think that maybe you should add it to your TBR for this month or next month too. So the first book that I do want to talk about is this thriller novel by B.A. Paris called The Therapist. And B.A. Paris has actually written one of my favorite thriller novels of all time. It's called Behind Closed Doors, and Behind Closed Doors is about a married couple who looks seemingly perfect in real life, but in reality they have a lot of things happening that are very gruesome and very hard to stomach behind closed doors. And I just fell in love with B.A. Paris's like twisted way of thinking in terms of domestic relationships. I find that she writes a lot of novels that are focused on the intricacies of domestic relationships and what it really means to be vulnerable with your significant other, what it really means to understand the significant other, and question if you really know the person that you're lying in bed with every night. So The Therapist follows a happy couple that moved into like the Circle, which is like this neighborhood that is filled with a lot of like nice people, and they all get along with each other and everything seems really perfect because, you know, everybody is normal and there's no like troubles in paradise. Nobody's really having noise complaints. There's no things that can really bother you as a neighbor. But our heroine soon finds out that her house that she used to live in belonged to someone who was gruesomely murdered. And then now she feels that she has this need to go figure out who done it and what actually happened to the girl that used to live in her house. And she decides to pry into other people's business and disrupt the peace in the neighborhood. And she soon finds that the neighbors are turning their backs on her and no longer answering her questions and are becoming more and more closed off. Now, this one, unfortunately, I did not like whatsoever. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I thought it was like super boring. I did not care about our heroine trying to solve this murder because I felt that she was ill-equipped, she wasn't smart, and she just didn't have the resources that she needed to solve it, but she just kept persisting, and then she gave up too quickly in certain parts too as well when things didn't go her way. So this was a very disappointing read from B.A. Paris. To be also honest, after I read Behind Closed Doors, I also read a couple of B.A. Paris's works and I actually ended up not liking it. So I felt that Behind Closed Doors was probably her best novel to date. Now the next thriller novel that I did read was this one from Sherry Lapina and it's called Not a Happy Family. So this is a 2021 release, same with The Therapist by B.A. Paris. And I absolutely adore Sherry Lapina. I find that her writing is very easy to sink into, and even though her stories usually focus around family issues that turn into thriller novels, and there are like a ton of characters, and there's usually like 4 to 5 different point of views, and then it obviously follows who done it and who's really behind the issues that are occurring in the book. So this one is about a family who is seemingly perfect once again. So it follows 3 siblings who are brought up in a family that was very well off because the father did really well for himself. He created a business and made a ton of money. He has a perfect doting wife because the wife doesn't really say anything when her husband lashes out at the kids, becomes emotionally abusive, becomes mentally abusive, and becomes really downright cruel to the 3 children growing up. So these 3 children have been raised pitted against each other. We have one child who is very perfect, who wanted to follow the path of her father, who wanted to impress her father, and who has like a very strict type A personality. Then we have a son who is smart, but then sometimes makes really poor decisions, always asks his father for help. And then we have our youngest, who is a free spirited type of character who wants to create art even though it doesn't make a lot of money, and her artworks are a little bit, you know, risky, and that bring a little bit shame to the family. So they all have their major struggles with the parents because the three children think that the wife or their mom is not helpful and that always like never stands up for them when they need it the most. Meanwhile, they also hate the father because the father has always been this really awful father to them. So they all have their motives as to why they also might want to kill their own parents because of a certain like big chunk of an inheritance, because they know that all the family assets will be divided among the siblings and things like that. So they all have an incentive as to why they need to kill their parents, and that's just what happens. One day they go to a dinner party, they all leave, and then the next day they get a call that their parents have been gruesomely murdered. And this is the story of like figuring out who is the sibling who done it, because usually like it's your family member. So this one, I thought it was super interesting. It definitely kept me compelled to keep listening to the audiobook. I was so intrigued by everybody's backstory. I hated the father so much. He is literally the worst character you could ever read in novels. He is compared to like Umbridge from Harry Potter. Like that's how much I hated the father. Like the father was just so unnecessarily cruel, but that's why, you know, he needed to be there, because he needed to get murdered. And it was so fun to read these characters because even though they felt bad that their parents were murdered, they also felt grateful that their parents were murdered because they just suffered so much because of their parents, you know, and they could finally have a chance of living a very happy life by having the money their parents own. So anyways, this one I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, mostly because there were some plot points that felt that it happened a little too easily, it came out of left field, and that there's just like things that were left a little bit unanswered towards the end that kind of felt like it was a little bit rushed. So that's why I only gave it 3.5, and it's not out of 5 stars. I also like to mention that I read all of Shari Lapina's works, and I love all her books. So I definitely will continue reading more of her thriller novels. So the next book that I wanted to talk about is this one called The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. And now I know when I took a picture of this book, I never showed it on my Instagram yet, nor did I show it to anybody of my followers on Instagram, but I showed it to my friend Lacey. And when I showed it to her, I had to explain to her right away that yes, I know that this is a sci-fi novel and this is a book that takes place in space. It's about astronauts going into space in the early, I think like 1970s or like late 1960s, and it's usually not my type of book. This can only be described as like a book that your father might pick up and read and you just completely just have like no interest in it whatsoever. But the reason why I bought this book was because Chris Hadfield is actually a Canadian astronaut. I think he was like the first Canadian astronaut to become the commander of the International Space Station, and he's kind of like a space hero in Canada. Like we really respect him because he kind of like blew up because of his quirky personality in space. He sang a lot of songs in space to pass time while he was on his missions, and he brought a lot of attention to Canadians about the importance of space exploration and a lot of things like that. So we have a lot of respect for him, and I personally really like his story. I read his memoir called An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, and I really enjoyed it because of the way he described how he got to become an astronaut, how he described the difficulties he had to put himself through, and then also like his missions in space, what it takes to be an astronaut and what it means to be an astronaut, like what you're giving up to as well. I really like that book, so I have a lot of respect for Chris Hadfield. And right now I think he's a retired astronaut, so he's no longer doing missions, but he's still continuing to talk about space and sciences to a lot of younger generation people. So The Apollo Murders, long story short, is a fiction novel that is based on a true story, because a lot of these instances actually did happen in space, especially the lot of political tension between like the Americans and the Russians when they were doing space exploration travels. And the Apollo murders follows like a group of astronauts who go into space where something happens and then tension starts to rise because suddenly there's a stranger on their like spaceship. They don't know if this person should be trusted or not because of their background. Like they're from Russia, they're on an American space station, they shouldn't be there, but like what are you gonna do? You're gonna leave someone in the middle of space to let them die on their own? So they do the humane thing and they bring the person on, and then now it's like this high tension, high stakes situation because now they have to follow rules, they have to communicate to the space stations back at home, and there's like a lot of things that are happening in this book. Now, remember when I said that this book is usually described to be as a book that your father might read? Yeah, exactly that. So I knew going into this audiobook that was like 15 hours long, I knew that I would probably have great struggle getting into this novel simply because it's just like a lot of terminology. It's like science fiction. And it also just didn't have a lot of thrilling elements. I would say that this book will be very close to The Martian by Andy Weir. Now, I never read The Martian, but I watched the movie, and Andy Weir's movie, like The Martian, that one, it wasn't like that there was like monsters chasing him on Mars and then that's why he's like really scared, but it was because he was alone on that planet and things weren't going his way, and that's why it was the slow burn thrilling aspects. So the Apollo murder is exactly that. There's nothing really crazy happening where like somebody is deliberately sabotaging others, but there's also like that underlying tension that you can't trust everybody on the spaceship. So that's the story. And unfortunately, I just couldn't get into it at all. Like, I just thought it was way over my head. It was filled with a lot of terminology and technical terms. Of course, it would be because a real astronaut is writing about a book about astronauts. But I just couldn't get into it. And unfortunately, I had to give this one like a 3 out of 5 stars. I also forgot to mention that I am drinking hot chocolate right now because we are in the cozy season. So the next book that I did read was a witchy novel called Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper, and this book actually came out this month. And I'm also wearing this really, really cute sweatshirt by Donna from Mood and Pages, and she was so kind enough to send me some of her works from her shop. So she designed all these designs. She opened up a little shop to sell bookish merch, and I absolutely adore it. Like, her designs are so pretty. So this is like the full design. It says read more, but in very spooky like penmanship, and then down here it says Bad Witches Book Club, which is so fitting for this book that I'm about to talk about. Okay, anyways, so Payback's a Witch is a book that I didn't know anything about. I literally picked it up because it was a witchy season and I wanted to read about witches. I didn't know it was like a sapphic romance involving two brilliant girls, and I absolutely thought that the romance was so sweet and it was so slow burn. So Payback's a Witch is about a girl who is someone who left the coven, I would say, and then she left because she was really sick and tired of how her old town that she used to live in really focused on the family lineage and like the families that you grew up in, so much to the point that if your family group is like in the lower ranking, like everybody will look down at you. So she unfortunately was from like a lower ranking, so she wanted to get rid of that pressure, so she leaves and she goes explores like a normal life where she gets a job, she does the things that she wants to do, and then she got called back to go back to that small town, and that's where she is enlisted to host like this like game tournament. And it's really interesting because I find that it reminded me a lot like Quidditch games from Harry Potter. So she is like the host of this spellcasting tournament, and she partners up with this other female heroine, and it's her love interest. They conspire together to kind of like rig the games in a way because they really hate like the top dog family because they think that they're such snobs and they've caused so much pain to witches in the community, so they want to get back at them. So they decide to work together during this whole tournament to kind of bring that family down, and it's really fun and it's really cute because this romance once again is very slow burn. You can sense the attraction that they have for each other, but they're also too worried to talk about it. So then sometimes like they're too shy to communicate their words. And it's so cute, so I highly recommend you to check this one out. This one I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, mostly because I wanted like the slow burn to be like a little bit hotter in the end, but overall still a perfect witchy read. So the next book that I did read was one that I've always wanted to read ever since I joined the book community because I've heard so much about it. So this one's called Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. And now this book, I don't have the physical copy, but I kind of really want to because I know that this book is actually in the shape and size of an IKEA catalog. And the reason why is because it's a horror novel about a group of employees who work for a furniture store that is eerily similar to IKEA, but like obviously disclaimer warning, it's not IKEA and it's definitely not based on IKEA. But basically these group of people have to work overnight in this like apartment store that is like IKEA. And they start to realize that something strange is really happening in the store and that there may be like monsters and ghosts lurking around the corners. And now they're doing seances, they're talking to ghosts, they're trying to run away from ghosts. It's like a horror novel where a lot of things are like happening to these group of people. And at times it was very gruesome and at times it was really fun. And I really enjoyed this one too as well. I thought that it definitely kept your attention. It was a very short novel. I think it was under 300 pages, so it was really easy to fly through, and it's definitely a recommendation for me. And I wish I had the physical copy because I know that even from the ebook that I borrowed from the library, they had like pictures and illustrations of the furniture that they were actually selling in the story. And it was so cool. So definitely go check it out. This one, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, mostly because I wanted it to be a little bit longer and I wanted someone to actually get hurt really badly or more so than what happened in the novel, just because I wanted to turn up that gruesome horror novel aspect. So the last book that I did read was The Perfect Family by Robin Harding, and this one is another family thriller novel. So I really like family thriller novels because usually like when families are described to be as like the perfect family, they usually have like a lot of problems buried underneath, and that's exactly what happened with The Perfect Family. So they want to look perfect, but they clearly aren't because this older son and the younger daughter are just having the worst times of their lives, I feel like. So the older son went to college, but then he decided to drop out because of something bad that happened in his first year. His parents, who worked so hard to put him into a prestigious school, is very disappointed in him and are always trying to, motivate him and push him back into college. Meanwhile, our younger daughter is troubled. She is snarky, she has a bad attitude, and she doesn't really want to focus on school, and she's also hiding a secret. And her secret is that she is a cam girl. She is an underage cam girl, and she's doing this because she wants like attention. She thinks that like the people that she's chatting with online are her friends, and she's not potentially, but basically putting herself in danger of like child predators. Then we have our wife, who is our mom, and she is supposed to be like this like really perfect, beautiful, serene type like character who practices yoga and meditation every day to gain control in her life. She is a decorator, so she decorates like people's houses, but it's getting hard to find more customers, so she's struggling with that part of herself. And then also she thinks that her husband may be cheating on her, and she's losing her mind over it because she loves her husband, but she thinks that her husband's betraying her. Then we have our dad, our husband character, who is a real estate agent. He's doing well for himself, but obviously when the real estate market tanks, he can't really find jobs here and there. So then that means that he's not making enough money for the whole family to live. Plus, all the pressures back at home where his wife is being a little bit weird and his son is not going to college and his daughter is flipping him off every day. He has a lot of stress too as well. So they go on like this like company dinner, and he wakes up completely blacked out from like the night before, and his colleagues at work threaten him and basically tell him that he was shit-faced and he assaulted someone while he was drunk, and that someone just so happened to be a sex worker. So then now he has his own issues of where he's trying to cover up the fact that he assaulted someone and that he cheated on his wife potentially. But with all that being said, now that we have all these 4 point of views, somebody is constantly attacking them by tormenting them, by like damaging their house. So they pelt eggs on their windows, they smear dog feces on the doorknob, they leave rats in their house. Like they basically destroy the whole house just to threaten them and basically do it as payback. And we don't know who is doing it. We don't know who's responsible for it. Is it the wife because the wife is stealing things and maybe she stole too many things and now that person wants those things back? Is it the husband who assaulted the sex worker and now the sex worker wants to, threaten him for money to cover up? Or is it our son who did something in college and now that victim is coming back to haunt him? Or is it a child predator who wants to get closer to our daughter? So it's like all these different point of views. Now, this one, I really was enjoying it. As you can tell, I really enjoyed it because I remembered all these things that were happening. I was just so intrigued by everybody's point of views. I was so invested in everybody's point of views. But I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars, mostly because this one ended off abruptly and it didn't really make sense. It came out of left field. I didn't feel complete. It made me feel unsatisfied. And that's like the problems with thriller novels I find when I'm reading them, is that there's always a chance that they're gonna turn out to be a dud in the end. And with romance novels, I know it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a happily ever after. But with thriller novels, we're kind of up in the air about it. We don't know if it's gonna work for you, if the solution's gonna work out for you, because every reader kind of has their own, take of like what's good and what's not. So thriller novels are always a little bit more risky. But that's that. I'll continue to read Robin Harding because I read Robin Harding's The Swap before, which is a polyamorous thriller novel where these couples were, sharing. They were having fun with each other, but then something happened and then now they don't know who done it again. I like that one, but The Perfect Family was a little bit of a letdown for me. Anyways, that is it for all the thriller, witchy, cozy autumn reads that I've read so far this week. I'm really enjoying this binge that I'm doing right now, and hopefully you guys are adding books into your TBR and exploring different genres. And I'll see you guys again next time in a new video. Bye.